It's 2 a.m. in Kyiv. The temperature outside has dropped to minus 20 degrees Celsius. Children are sleeping in coats. Hospitals are running on generators. And somewhere in the darkness above, a swarm of over 80 Russian attack drones is closing in. This isn't a nightmare. This is February 2026, and Russia just launched its most terrifying weapon of this entire war. Not a hypersonic missile, not a nuclear warhead, a calendar. Winter itself has become Putin's most powerful tool of destruction. And this week, he used it with absolutely no mercy. Before we break down what happened hour by hour, you need to understand the doctrine behind all of this, because this is not random. This is not desperation. This is a calculated, systematic military strategy that Russia has been perfecting for over 3 years. It's called energy warfare, and military analysts say it follows a deliberate 3-phase doctrine. Phase 1, destroy generation. Take out the power plants, the thermal stations, the hydro facilities, the combined heat-tanned power plants that keep apartment buildings warm in sub-zero temperatures. Phase 2, disrupt transmission, the substations, the high-voltage lines, the transformer hubs. Even if a power plant is still standing, if the grid can't carry the electricity, it doesn't matter. Phase 3, paralyze distribution. Attack the local automation systems, the neighborhood grids, the very last mile of infrastructure that connects power to the people. Russia has been executing all 3 phases simultaneously this winter, and the timing, not an accident. Russia chose the coldest winter Ukraine has faced in a decade to hit the hardest. According to Ukraine's International Energy Agency assessment, over 70% of Ukraine's thermal, hydro, and nuclear power generation capacity has been damaged or destroyed since October 2023. 70%. Think about that for a moment. If the United States lost 70% of its electricity generation overnight, American cities would collapse within days. Ukraine has been operating on the remaining 30% for months. And now Russia is going after that 30%. Now, let's get into the timeline. Because what happened between February 3rd and February 15th, 2026, is one of the most intense aerial campaigns in modern European warfare. And almost no one in the Western media is talking about the full scale of it. The first wave hits before dawn. Ukraine's Air Force confirms that Russia launched 521 aerial weapons in a single overnight strike. A combination of air-launched cruise missiles, ground-launched ballistic missiles, and Shate-series kamikaze drones. Let's put 521 in perspective. That's more projectiles than some countries have in their entire military arsenal, launched in one night. The primary weapon in this swarm? The Geran-2, Russia's domestically produced version of Iran's Shate-136 drone. It's a triangular delta-wing loitering munition with a pusher engine in the rear. It flies low and slow, typically between 150 and 185 kilometers per hour, which makes it hard to detect on radar, but vulnerable to air defense when found. It carries a warhead of roughly 30 to 50 kilograms of explosive, not enough to take down a building on its own, but more than enough to destroy a substation, shred a transformer, or collapse a section of a heat and power plant's roof. The targets: combined heat and power plants in Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Dnipro. Russia hits thermal stations running in heating-only mode, purely keeping people alive in minus 20-degree weather. In Kharkov, the city makes a horrifying emergency decision. Officials order engineers to drain the heating fluid from the pipeline system serving 820 apartment buildings. Not because they want to, because if they don't, the pipes will burst and there will be nothing left to restore. 820 apartment buildings in minus 20 temperatures, drained of heat overnight. More than 50,000 people lose power. Residents flee to the metro, not to commute to survive. The underground stations become emergency warming centers as temperatures above ground become life-threatening. President Zelensky takes to Telegram with a message that carries both fury and desperation. Taking advantage of the coldest days of winter to terrorize people is more important to Russia than resorting to diplomacy. Here's the context that makes this strike even more outrageous. Russia launched this attack on the same day that trilateral peace talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States were being organized in Abu Dhabi. The ceasefire on energy infrastructure, a pause Trump had personally requested, had just expired. Russia let it expire. Then immediately launched their biggest attack of the year. DTEK CEO releases footage of the aftermath. One of their power plants reduced to what he describes as a pile of mangled metal and charred concrete. The attacks do not pause. They never pause. Russia conducts what military analysts describe as a sustained saturation campaign. Not one massive strike followed by recovery, but a relentless rotation of nightly drone waves designed to prevent Ukrainian repair crews from completing work before the next wave hits. Think about what that means tactically. Crew finishes repairing a substation at 11 p.m. The next drone wave arrives at 1 a.m. The substation is hit again. The crew has to start over. In the freezing cold. In the dark. Under the threat of another strike. By February 7th and 8th, Ukrainergo confirms that over 14 million Ukrainians experienced multi-hour blackouts in a 48-hour period. 14 million people. Roughly a third of Ukraine's entire remaining population. 32 regional heating plants suspended operations. 117 schools temporarily closed. Hospitals across multiple oblasts fell back on diesel backup generators. Ukraine's grid head Vitaly Zakhenko gives one of the most alarming statements of the war. Asked directly whether blackouts could last the entire winter, replies, "Potentially, this is possible. The war is not over." February 9th, Russia escalates again. Strikes target power and gas facilities across Zaporizhia, Kherson, Kharkov, and Donetsk simultaneously, a four-front energy assault designed to overwhelm Ukraine's repair capacity across an entire geographic arc. People in Kyiv are queuing in the street for free hot meals being served by veterans of the Ukrainian 3rd Assault Brigade. Veterans who are feeding their own neighbors because their neighbors have no power, no heat, and no water. For the 8th day in a row. Russia and Ukraine had agreed to a brief pause in attacks on energy infrastructure framed as a confidence-building measure ahead of peace talks. Russia abided by it for approximately 5 days. Then they obliterated the ceasefire, along with 3 combined heat and power plants. Secretary of State Marco Rubio asked whether Russia was serious about ending the war. "We don't know if the Russians are serious about ending the war, they say they are, and while the diplomats talked, Russia kept launching drones." By February 14th, Zelensky released the weekly tally that went viral: 1,300 attack drones, 1,200 guided aerial bombs, 50 ballistic missiles in 7 days. One single week of February 2026. Meet Tishiana, a Kyiv resident captured in a Kyiv Independent report. She has not had reliable electricity or heating since Russian Shate drones began repeatedly hitting the city's power plants in early January. She told the reporter that she lies in bed at night thinking about putting on gloves in her own home. In the dark, in winter. Ukraine's energy experts now say the country faces 8 to 12 hours of blackouts every single day, not occasionally, every day. Even the most optimistic projections project that 4-hour daily cuts would still be in place for months because you cannot repair a thermal power plant in a week. These are multi-year reconstruction projects being attempted under active bombardment. The economic impact is catastrophic. Factories running at reduced capacity, farms unable to operate equipment. Military production, which Ukraine desperately needs, is dependent on a stable power grid that no longer exists. Air defense. Ukraine's multi-layered network, combining American Patriot batteries, German Iris-D systems, and Soviet Tiras-300 complexes, intercepts a significant portion of incoming threats. On some nights, interception rates exceed 70%. But against a swarm of 83 or 450 drones simultaneously, even 70% means dozens of weapons hitting targets. Every drone Russia launches costs approximately $50,000 to produce. Every interceptor missile Ukraine fires costs significantly more. Russia is deliberately trying to exhaust Ukraine's interceptor stockpile. It's economic warfare disguised as air warfare. Grid hardening. Roughly half of Ukrainergo's transformer fleet is now protected by secondary concrete structures. Several units have survived multiple direct drone hits because of this fortification. European imports. Ukraine can import up to 1.2 gigawatts of emergency power from Romania, Slovakia, and Poland. Critical but not enough to replace what Russia has destroyed. Ukrainian counterstrikes. On the same nights Russia launched these swarms, Ukraine was hitting back, striking drone production sites in occupied Zaporizhia, electronic warfare installations in occupied Donetsk, and military concentrations in Russia's Belgorod region. The message from Kyiv: you hit our power plants, we hit your drone factories. The Geran 2 is Russia's domestically manufactured version of Iran, Shat 136, which is itself derived from a 1980s West German anti-radar drone design. The weapon currently freezing Ukrainian cities has its engineering DNA in Cold War-era NATO technology. It flies at altitudes between 50 and 200 meters, low enough to evade some radar systems. Its characteristic pusher engine sound, a lawnmower-like buzz, has become the signature sound of terror for Ukrainian civilians. When you hear it at 3 a.m., you run. At roughly $50,000 per unit, it's cheap enough to produce in massive numbers. Launch 80 at once, except that air defense shoots down 55 and still hit 25 targets. Against substations and transformers, 25 hits per night, every night, is strategically devastating. And those European-made components? Austrian sensors? German spark plugs routed through China. Parts from companies that had no idea their products were ending up inside, weapons hitting Ukrainian kindergartens and apartment buildings. The EU has sanctions. The sanctions have holes, and the drones keep coming. Here is the brutal geopolitical reality of February 2026. Russia is simultaneously sitting at the peace table and launching 1,300 drones a week. Peace talks in Abu Dhabi. Peace talks in Geneva. Trilateral discussions with the US, Ukraine, and Russia. And through all of it, the drones keep flying. What does that tell you? It tells you that Russia is using the drone campaign as a negotiating weapon. Every substation destroyed, every heating plant obliterated, every 14 million Ukrainians thrown into darkness. That's pressure. That's leverage. That's Putin's way of saying, come to the table on my terms, or your people freeze. Zelensky's message after Russia broke the energy ceasefire was aimed directly at Washington. Without pressure on Russia, there will be no end to this war. Scenario 1. The free strategy works. Russia continues the drone campaign through February and March. Ukraine's grid degrades below the threshold where meaningful military production is possible. Popular morale reaches a breaking point. Ukraine comes to the table with less leverage and accepts terms closer to Moscow's demands. Russia wins the energy war and uses it to win the political war. Scenario 2. Ukraine holds the line. Western air defense reinforcements raise Ukraine's interception rates above 85%. The drone campaign becomes economically unsustainable for Russia. Spring arrives, reducing heating demand. Ukraine's grid limps through winter. Talks restart on more balanced terms. Scenario 3. Escalation spiral. Ukraine dramatically expands its own long-range drone strikes on Russian energy infrastructure. Russia responds with even larger swarms. Talks collapse. Nobody wins. The war enters its 5th year with no end in sight. Here is what we know for certain. 1,300 drones in 1 week is not a military tactic. It is a siege. Russia is besieging Ukraine not with walls and moats but with darkness and cold, trying to break the will of a nation not by defeating its army, but by making civilian life unbearable. And Ukraine is still standing. Every repair crew that goes out in -20 temperatures to fix a bombed substation is fighting just as hard as any soldier on the front line. Every hospital that keeps its generators running. Every Ukrainian family that endures another night in the dark and chooses not to surrender. That is resistance. The question is not whether Ukraine can survive this winter. The question is whether the world is willing to give them the tools they need to end it. How many more drones does it take before someone makes Russia pay a real price? What do you think will happen next? Will Western pressure force Russia to stop the drone campaign? Or will Putin keep pushing until Ukraine breaks? Drop your analysis in the comments below. And if you think this kind of in-depth coverage matters, hit that subscribe button because we're not going anywhere, and neither is this war.